This is going to be your guide to using Roaring Moon in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. So let's see what Power Crep Salamence looks like. 135 attack versus the 139. The 119 speed is where things feel really good right here. It feels like there's nothing you can't do with a Dragon Dance and a 119 speed. That's kind of like the weird thing about Salamence, because I always felt like Garchomp just had the edge. There's a Scarf Chomp out there. How is Salamence going to do anything against it? It gets the Dragon Dance, and then it still gets outsped and KO'd by the Garchomp. So the 100 speed, and then also, back when Pokemon was different, there were other Scarf Pokemon, other +1 Pokemon around the 100 speed tier, and then Salamence couldn't take off, even though it has the Moxie ability. It just needs to outspeed everything, get that first KO, and then 6-0. Simple, right? But for some reason, just never happened. So Roaring Moon, with that 119 speed, has all kinds of weird stuff going on. You can go Adamant Nature, and then still have more speed than the Garchomp. And it can also kind of be adaptive, that if for some reason 105 speed Pokemon, 110 speed Pokemon are finding the +1. So there's like weird slower bracket Pokemon that are going agility. You can still just kind of outspeed everything with the Roaring Moon. Then that attack comes into play. You can go Adamant, just boost it even further. What's going to survive against Roaring Moon doesn't really seem like too much of anything. But in practice, Roaring Moon, not that great, because we're in a bulky, tanky, stally kind of meta. So like, you go Dragon Dance, opponent goes Iron Defense. Darn. Or they just bring in a Dondozo. Physical attackers that are trying to like Swords Dance, Dragon Dance, and then Dondozo hits the field, it's just over. Unless you're Dragonite, and you're not a Terra Normal trash Dragonite, because then Dondozo can't fissure you. But Roaring Moon, with Dragon Dark, no flying, so that's actually a huge benefit in this fissure meta, is actually just going to be susceptible to a Dondozo, or again, just kind of tanky, Iron Defense, full defense tank Pokemon. That's not great, even though, like, the upside of this Pokemon seems crazy. That you go Booster Energy, again, just kind of buying another Life Orb for your team. That's effectively it. Like, a lot of the Paradox Pokemon, high speed, high attack, pushing the limits of what a sweeper is, except without an ability, so it's like a weird Mega Evolution kind of thing, and then they get their own Life Orb, so you can still run another Life Orb Pokemon on your team, is kind of it, and then you get 30% damage, which has like weird interactions. So Dragon Dance plus Life Orb, or plus that 30%, is effectively like a +2. An effective +2, 139 attack Pokemon potentially running Adamant is putting everything into the dumpster, even the most defensively bulky Pokemon, so you kind of want to just lead Roaring Moon and hope they don't lead their setup tank, and then you just kind of run away with the battle. You get that +1, you 3-0, see you later Timmy, that's definitely a possibility, but then at that 119 speed, maybe you aren't invested, you can get outscarfed, you can kind of get picked up by things. 4x Fairy Weakness, very not good. That can just put you in some bad situations against like a bulky Pokemon that has a Fairy type move. Doesn't have to do anything. It can eat the +0 Iron Head and then just take out your Roaring Moon. That's kind of like this weird thing that I just haven't folded to a Roaring Moon yet, even though it's everywhere. So it just kind of goes back to a problem that we see with a lot of other Dragon Dance Pokemon, a lot of other just like hard, ancient 6-0 sweeping kind of strategies, is that Pokemon isn't an honest game anymore. I don't think it's been an honest kind of sweeping game since Generation 4, because Generation 5 had Hidden Power, Ferrothorn, and Forces of Nature, and brought in a lot of other ugliness. Generation 6, maybe because everyone was just kind of unga-bunga mega Pokemon, but then we had Aegislash. And Aegislash really made it to where, oh, you're going Swords Dance, oh, you're going Dragon Dance, you gotta swing at me eventually, buddy, and then you lose all of your stats into just an absurd Pokemon, and then Generation 7 meta was comparably ugly to Generation 9. So these strategies just aren't free anymore. Also with like Terastallization, if they predict your move, turn it into a resist. Now Roaring Moon is just kind of losing. So a lot of weird stuff going on with this Pokemon. I guess if you lead it, go Dragon Dance, it's just going to increase your chance of winning just on the spot. So maybe that's how you run it. Otherwise it could be a liability and then weird things happen. Maybe you just go for some cute combos. Like what we learned with the Houndstone strategy is that it's bad in 6v6. Somehow the best strategy in 3v3 Battle Stadium, even though it doesn't seem like it. Like you can't bring Houndstone as a one-dimensional 3v3 strategy where you have to like Revival Blessing and stuff and like make your team composition just the exact same thing, where it's like, yes, I have to run Palmot, I have to bring Sandstream, turns out Tyranitar's the best there, and then it all like kind of wiggles into the Houndstone sweep. Yeah, that's kind of like the best thing ever. So sometimes like one-dimensional strats, they work really well in Pokemon, even if like super telegraphed. So what if you just go like Eject Pack Overheat on the Drought? That way you free up something else on your Roaring Moon. That now you have the Photosynthesis active. It does go away when the sun goes away, and we're not extending that with the Heat Rock. So you're not getting like the craziest uptime, but you don't need it. Get that Dragon Dance, get the Photosynthesis, boom, you're snowballing, game's over anyways. Maybe that opens up the Focus Sash for you. But then that's like another weird thing about the identity of the Paradox Pokemon. So if you're not running Boost Energy, you're kind of running a regular item, and then it doesn't really feel like any item is kind of the best option. The idea behind the Focus Sash is that it counters their counters. So if they had like a chance of doing something to your Roaring Moon because you're booster energy and you're telegraphing and stuff, Photosynthesis is still going to telegraph because it's like, oh, it boosts your attack. Well, that means you are Adamant Nature, so there's going to be some like speed tier vulnerabilities potentially, or weird stuff like that. But then Focus Sash just says, nah. And then you're just kind of winning from there. Torkoal can be a pretty difficult Pokemon to deal with. You want to go with the Modest Nature, maybe even like Quiet, because it's not going to change any of the stat stuff. Max hit points, max special attack, and then you just run it down. That Overheat's still going to be high damage, very oppressive, with that Drought boosting as well. Eject Pack takes you out, gets Roaring Moon in for free because the opponent already hit the Torkoal, and now you just have a Roaring Moon with a free booster energy / Photosynthesis, and then you can set up the Dragon Dance, get rid of the counter, and then you can win the game. Now, Focus Sash means that they do have Sucker Punch, kind of gets ugly. Any kind of priority kind of gets ugly. So might have to be something you need to consider. But also, like, you are a 139 attack Pokemon that is just running the plus 30% damage on Photosynthesis. Depending on the matchup, like, you just throw the move. You can throw that Outrage and KO anything that isn't resisted or immune, so you don't have to worry about the Dragon Dance. Does lock you in, does do some weird things, but remember, Torkoal's softening them up even. So if they lead with their counter as like an anti-lead to Roaring Moon, Overheat Crunch, they get KO'd, you're still at full health, now you Dragon Dance, and then you win. I don't know, you can do some weird stuff. So that's something we haven't really seen develop from the Photosynthesis or the Quark Drive. I guess in doubles it's easier to kind of get that, but even single strategies, we've seen these kind of develop from time to time. That you can run singles Trick Room if you're creative enough, but no one's like kind of committed to it, even on Pokemon that are getting high presence like the Roaring Moon. And maybe that's the best way of getting more reliability out of it. I don't know, and then you have like some kind of third follow-up Pokemon that's nasty. I would recommend Assault Vest King Gambit. Assault Vest King Gambit's just the best thing. Like, you can guillotine a lot of the threats, you can take out ghost type Pokemon. Like, you just win with Assault Vest King Gambit. And maybe they're like maybe you trade on the Roaring Moon, they're down to their last Pokemon, you just Metal Burst and win. And then King Gambit's just way too good. So like an incredible splash for your third slot while you're trying to do like some kind of gimmick. Cyclizar, also another really good one. As we talked about, Dondozo just dumpsters the Roaring Moon. But if you have a substitute, that means 2 Fissure needs to land, and that can maybe do some weird stuff in the calculations. It also means, like, sub Roaring Moon is a possibility to, like, anti-tank all the things that would Iron Defense or would stop you. And it does exist, like, sub just being splashed on a sweeping Pokemon to set up a sub and then win against a tanky team on the spot. That does happen quite a bit in Pokemon, but then, like, you're cutting damage, and then you're cutting moveset, and then things get kind of weird on the Syndrome, but definitely a possibility. Obviously not with Focus Sash, like Booster Energy, Photosynthesis, sub instead of Dragon Dance, and then just anti-tanking. Yeah, that's also pretty viable. You can do the same thing with Cyclizar, to where Cyclizar passes you that substitute, and if you have the Focus Sash while Dragon Dancing behind a sub, that means you have to KO this Pokemon 3 times to KO it. That's not going to happen in Roaring Moon Wins if Cyclizar gets the setup, and Cyclizar gets the setup. So one of these 2 Pokemon actually might just be like the Giga Uber win condition, and that's what unlocks Roaring Moon more and just makes it impossible to kind of stall out. I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of it on this Pokemon. That, once again, Paradox Pokemon going to be very one-dimensional. I guess, like, they have Taunt, I've seen it, to, like, anti-tank, but then again, you're hurting your moveset, so it's kind of like a weird thing to where if you throw King Gambit on your team, just, like, the best 6-slot Pokemon ever in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, it seems. And maybe you have Roaring Moon Torkoal or Roaring Moon Cyclizar. Kind of like the Cyclizar more because there are so many tanks. and you just kind of sit on that. You just kind of say, all right, this Roaring Moon is to like anti-tank a tanky team that doesn't have a Dondozo with the Cyclizar and then Hard Sweep, and then you can still have 3 other Pokemon to run Battle Stadium for a completely different strategy. So you make a triple core of something completely different, and then you have Roaring Moon Cyclizar just kind of waiting in that slot. And we've talked about that for some other Paradox Pokemon. This Iron Hands moveset is absolutely filthy, but if it's your last Pokemon and the opponent brings in a Ghost type, you're completely immune, and you just lose the game. But if they don't show a Ghost type in Team Select, you can easily just win and just make it to where the opponent can't do anything about this Pokemon. So what you do is, instead of running a team that's like, oh, 6 very diverse Pokemon that can kind of piece together and have some soft synergy to work against any opponent's team composition, no, what you do is you have an Unga Bunga Core 3 that's pretty strong, and then just tech Pokemon to where it's about absence. That if they don't have something on their team, you run that, and that's like your now 90% win condition because they don't have a Ghost-type Pokemon. Even though it's going to be in like 10% of battles, you're still winning more Pokemon games. And maybe that's been the proper way of playing since Generation 6. Talking about this ongoing existential crisis about Generation 9, changing everything I know about Pokemon. What was there to fear about running stored power strategies? I know people would still like just Unga the stored power and hope there wasn't a Dark-type Pokemon, but maybe that was just the proper way. You bring a team that scares off Dark-types, or if the opponent doesn't have it, you just run that and then you win. So maybe that's kind of the idea, is like if you kind of see it to where, oh, we just Shedtail Cyclizar the Roaring Moon into 20% of opposing team compositions because whatever ends up taking a Roaring Moon just doesn't exist on their team, and then you just always win those games, and then you can still have a strong core otherwise, do that. And then that's why Roaring Moon is losing so much, even though it's kind of everywhere. Even though it can be very powerful, and it has like some of the hardest 6-0 sweeping potential in the game, and you look at this Pokemon and go like, oh yeah, it should be free. It's not free. But if played correctly, it means your opponent is just not allowed to play the game. And then you can just like Giga super hard win into almost anything. Maybe that's the secret. I don't know. But yeah, so there we go, guys. That's breakdown of Roaring Moon. It's like the weird Houndstone thing, that people overrate it. It's actually bad. But then you have to play it like super duper specifically and super duper perfectly, but then it actually turns out to be like the best Pokemon. I think maybe Roaring Moon falls into that, to where like you can't just run it like a Dragon Dance Pokemon. You actually have to give it a little bit, and then it gives back to you in certain situations, and then you just always win. So there we go, guys. Hope you guys enjoy the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.